Hi, I'm Bob Sanheinrich. I'm going to be talking about Wolfram's new resource system. It's the new technological framework for distributing Wolfram language content to users through our cloud. So now that we all are experts on the data repository, we're going to talk about the more general framework that houses the data repository. And that's what we're called the resource system. Here's a brief overview of what we're talking about. I'm going to start off talking about some of the terminology. What's a repository? What's a resource? What's a publisher account? Why do you need it? And then we're going to spend the bulk of the talk on the repositories that we have now, we will have very shortly. And those are the 5 that you see there in the middle of the screen. And then I was going to talk about creating your own resources again, but it doesn't seem like anybody came in from the last time. So if we have time, maybe we'll look at that because it's a nifty example. And then at the end, if we have time, we'll look at some of the repositories that we're planning to add in the medium to long term, and maybe even talk about the marketplace, which is something that we're hesitant to talk about, but is exciting. So the resource system is the whole technology, and it's divided into repositories. So one repository has content type of a certain kind. We already just talked about the data repository that has data in it. And repositories are distinguished basically by the 3 features listed there. So each one has a unique website that has dedicated pages for each resource. Each one has a unique integration into the Wolfram language. So what functions you use to retrieve the content or work with the content depend on which repository it's from. And then each repository has specific metadata within the resources. There's some standard metadata like name. They all have a name. But then it's extended for each repository as needed. So in each repository is made of resources. So resources are sort of the fundamental unit of the resource system. That's why we called it that. And a resource object is basically a handle for content that contains metadata. So you can, like I showed in the last talk, you can grab the metadata, and then for data resources, the content is retrieved with resource data. For other types of resources, there will be other integrations, and we'll see that. So another important thing about the resource system is that it's open to submissions. So if you have content that you think that you would like to publish, and you want us to see if it's good, you can submit it, and we'll review it. That requires what we're calling a publisher account. These are new things. The system for handling publisher accounts is still sort of in the beta stage, I would say, but we can do it. We have a form that you can go to on the data repository to ask us for one, and then we'll just communicate over email. That's sort of what I mean by the beta stage. At some point, we'll have a nice little web portal. But if you have a publisher account, you can authorize other users through their Wolfram ID, or if your Wolfram ID can be authorized by multiple publisher accounts. So it's not like a person has a publisher account. There's a publisher account that has authorized users, and users can be authorized by publisher accounts. So if you ask us for one, we'll ask you why you want it, what kind of stuff you want to publish. If that sounds good, we'll give you a publisher account, and then again, it's a manual process with humans reviewing your actual submissions, whether they're data or another kind. So that's the important thing to realize. So data repository, it's been out since April. We just talked a lot about it. I won't do anything else with that. But that was the first repository. The neural net repository, get excited. It's released right now. So there's a whole nother, or I guess released on Tuesday when Stephen talked about it. He sort of stole some of my talks here. So there's another talk about the neural net repository that Megan and Matteo are giving tomorrow morning. If you get up and get some coffee in time, they're there waving in the back. So they're gonna give a full half hour about the neural net repository and neural net resources. So let's look briefly at the website. So you can see the design similar to data repository, but here we have all of the resources right on the homepage. If we pick out one of these at random, like the data repository, there's a name, there's a brief description, there's a more detailed description, there's a brief summary of how big this thing is. But this one also has this training set information. Can you guys see that all right? Should I make it bigger? Yeah, here we go. This one also has training set information. And for neural networks, the training data is crucial to understanding the network. The same network trained on different data sets is going to be a totally different thing. So this tells you what it was trained on and links to it, so you can find it. Then, just like data repository, we have this example section where you have inputs and outputs that you can copy directly into Wolfram language to use. It has the buttons for opening this up in cloud or downloading it. And then it also has these construction notebook links, and we'll look at the construction notebooks in just a second. Also, neural nets have a higher dependency on your Wolfram language than data does. So some of these might only work in 11.2 or eventually 11.3, and it'll note what version you need. So that's important. And of course, there's a citation of a lot of these came from published literature on neural nets. We didn't make this all up ourselves. So this cite's where it came from. So we can look at a quick demo. There's that's imagery style one that Stephen demoed is the coolest one, but he took that already. So I'm going to use a different one. So here's one relative depth hourglass net trained on depth in the wild data. There's detailed description. Just like data resources, there can be more than one content element. So the evaluation net is the main deal. That's where that's the train network. That's the main event. If you say resource data, which in this case is equivalent to net model, so that will give you the evaluation net, and you can let's grab an image from the web. See how that does. There we go. So this, if I apply this network to that image, what I get back is some kind of tensor list of vectors, maybe a list of matrices. I don't know, but I can do this, and it creates this cool 3D version from the 2D image, and it does pretty well. And if you want to know where, how did I come up with this? I didn't. Either Megan or Matteo did, and I copied it from the website because there's examples on the website, right? So that's what's great about having those examples on the website. So that's the neural net repository. Neural nets are all the rage these days, and they're taking us to the future. So we're right at the forefront in distributing those things. The next repository that is also being released right now is the demonstrations repository. So the demonstrations project has been around for 10 years. So maybe I was a little too excited with it right now. But people have been submitting demonstrations with cool manipulates and dynamic content for a decade. There's over 10,000 of these, 11,428 of these. But what we're doing is we're in the process of migrating them into the resource system so that they're easier to use in the Wolfram language. So on that, previously you had to go to the web page, download a notebook, open that notebook, copy the part that you want, put it into your notebook. You might have to run initialization code before you can run it, or you could open a CDF and run it in CDF player. But those are not as convenient as this.
So by migrating, you mean replacing ultimately?
Probably, yeah. So yeah. The first step is, migrate. The website, there are no immediate plans to change the website to match like the style of the data repository. But I wouldn't rule that out. But it's not in the first thing. And the means of submitting demonstrations resources has not changed. We're not doing that through resource submit yet. That probably is something that will change at some point. So there's a demonstration called Radial Engine. We can get metadata about it, 4-stroke Radial Engine. We can give credit to the author, Yu Sung. And we added some metadata as part of this, which is sort of neat, symbols used. So this shows you all the symbols that are used. So you can grab a bunch of these and do some sort of analytics on what symbols are most popular. I think if and list are going to be on the list, but you can probably remove trivial ones like that. And then resource data, again, is the integration tool for demonstration. So this just gives you the manipulate, right, in the language, right? And it's much easier to grab. So the highlight of the demonstrations project being integrated into the resource system is that you can do this. You can just grab the manipulate with one line of code. The next repository, which is not quite released, but so this is a sneak preview, is the formula repository. So this is, again, taking a feature that already existed, and I am not on a stairway. So formula data has been around since version 10. And there's over 1,000 formulas in formula data. But unlike demonstration, where there's a nice website, but the integration into the language is bad, formula data is well integrated into the language, but there was no website. And there's an opportunity to make a good website. So here's an example of using the language. This is really nothing new. You can grab a resource. Formula data works just like it would on the name. You can grab this metadata. So that's new. You can get metadata for these things. But the fun part is that each of these formula will have a web page. Similar, so some of the part of it's similar: the name, description, detailed description. Here, there's also going to be a pretty little formula and a table describing it. But here, the fun part is that they're all going to have these live forms where you can put in whatever values you want. You can put in units, or it can infer units, and it'll give you a response. You can see, obviously, we have some formatting work to do. This is sort of ugly. But each formula will have a live web page that's publicly accessible, and you can use to calculate solutions for those formulas. And once again, of course, there are examples and citation information. So that's the formula repository, which hopefully will be out in a matter of weeks, not months. After that is the function repository, which is not just a repackaging of existing things. It's something brand new. And it's something that will allow what people have wanted for a long time in sort of a simple form. And that's to have standard resources that you can use to extend your local copy of Wolfram language. So you can import function definitions and use them in your session, and you get to choose which ones you import and which ones you don't. So here's a quick example where we have something called lookup sequence. It has metadata again that we can look. If I use this function resource function, what it gives me back is this blob, which is what we call a resource function object. So this is like a generalization of lookup if you're used to lookup. So lookup sort of doesn't take this list of keys to look deeper and deeper into something, but this one does. So it's looking for people, and then the person named Suzanne, and then Suzanne's hobbies. And if at any point it doesn't find that, it'll give a default, which is really nice to use, so that in the nested thing, it doesn't throw errors that aren't handled well. So of course, this exact function isn't important. What's important is that we have this tool for adding these resource functions into your session, and you can register these, which is another notion so that it persists from session to session. We'll just do one more example because this one's sort of more fun. Symbol dependency graph. So this takes a symbol and creates a graph object for the dependencies. So once again, I can get the function. So here I just have ABC. A depends on B and C. B depends on C. C doesn't depend on either of them. I can make this simple graph. To a more interesting one, what I'm doing here is I'm grabbing the actual symbol that underlies this resource function. So we have this resource function symbol graph, and if I take the resource object and look at symbol name, there's this symbol underneath. So I'm taking that and using it to create a graph of its own dependencies. So it's eating itself a little bit. And you can see in this tooltip means that each one of these is some symbol in that context. It's probably really small to see. I don't know if that's any better. All right. So yeah, this is neat because it will allow. Let me just go back. It'll allow sort of a new class of functions. So what functions make sense for the function repository, as opposed to just creating new symbols in standard Wolfram language. And there are a few times where that makes sense. One is when it's sort of something that's very niche that most people won't want. Another one is when it's something neat but hasn't really been fully developed. It's a little underdeveloped. We can sort of use the function repository as a trial ground. And at some point, it might be promoted to a system level function. And there are a couple other cases where we in the past, we've had tools that we thought were cool, but just not right. And we could maybe put those right in the function repository. So here's a nifty little example where I'm putting a bunch of these different resource types together. So resource data, that's grabbing information about our solar system from the data repository. I'm using that same lookup sequence that we saw on the last slide to dig more than one level deep into the data. And then I'm using the formula resource for gravitational acceleration. And I'm applying the values for Europa to that formula. And so that all comes together and gives us a result. Let's ask alpha, make sure it's right. Hey, it worked. So yeah, this is to demonstrate that the Wolfram language is a coherent system where things naturally work together. These aren't packages developed by people who've never met each other that you need converters to go between. All of these repositories are Wolfram language things that all work. So I think you all were here for data repository talk where we saw how to create your own resource. So here I'm creating a function resource. I have time, so we'll do this one. So here what I'm doing is find faces, classify with notable person. This is one of our built-in machine learning things. I'm sticking his name in a rectangle on the face, and I'm making it so that if I click on the name, we'll see how the network. There we go. We can get Wikipedia data back from it. So here's a nice little function. We're not going to put this in system-level context anytime soon. But maybe I want to deploy it to my own cloud, or maybe I want to submit it and see if it's good enough for the repository. We can see who I look like. Oh no! Okay, we'll just scroll down. All right, so that's a function, and if I want to create a resource object out of it, it's as simple as just saying that it's a function resource, giving it a name, giving it a description, and then it works just like one from the repository. So here's that nice function blob. If I want to deploy it or submit it, it's nice to add additional metadata and examples. So those template notebooks are great for this, and we will have template notebooks for each repository, but right now the data one's the only one that's released. So if you're ambitious and you want to get something done before then, you can do it just like this, put all the metadata into association. If you ask for an example notebook but none exists, so creates one for you that you can modify. So I'll just create a function. And let's see, I'll grab this guy. Let's say resource function of that guy. And then I'll say identify a celeb. And I'll grab that. And okay, who's got a favorite celebrity? Anybody? Anybody? What? Clooney, good one. Let's see how that does. Hey, it worked. All right, so now we have an example notebook, and we can cloud deploy this publicly. And there's my nice HTML summary. And again, you can grab that cloud object and send it to your colleagues, and they can use your function to find out they look like serial killers. From the language instead of from the notebook, you can do resource submit as well. So if I submit this, I should get back a submission object, and that enters it into the queue where it will be reviewed by humans. So that's sort of the current state. For the future, we want to have an API repository where instead of the content being downloaded and running on your machine, we are going to host APIs in our cloud that you can run Wolfram language content. Some of it might just be a web deployed form of a standard Wolfram language symbol. Some of it might be new cool things that are specifically useful to be in an API that maybe a web page would want to ping. We want packlet resources, which is sort of like the big brother to the function resource. So a function resource just takes a single function and sort of stores it in memory. A packlet resource would be a proper packlet with source files and notebooks and front-end stuff and all sorts of whatever we'd have in our standard packlets, which some of you might be very familiar with. Other things like device connections, service connections will be coming down the pipeline as well. And then the last thing I guess I'll just hint at is adding a marketplace on top of the whole resource system. So right now everything is public and free. Most of the stuff that we put up there will probably continue to be that way. But in order to entice you all, the ones with red badges, not black badges, to make stuff, well, we're going to create a way for you to charge people to use it, and we'll take a small piece, and you'll get a big piece, and everyone will be happy. The details of that are still very much being worked out, so don't ask me exactly how much it'll cost yet. So that's it, and time for questions, and if you want to ask about data repository now, if you thought of something new, feel free. Yes?
Yeah. How does this relate to the practice of writing packages and using packages with functions to solve a particular problem?
So when you say package, you mean like a .m or .wl file?
Yeah, exactly.
Right.
Do you envision this replacing that workflow? Or?
I imagine the packlet resource, the packlet repository, being the method to distribute content like that. So packlets are basically wrappers on a lot of times package files that are stored in a way that they're easy to load and the system knows how to integrate them. That's all a packlet is. So we'll probably want to create something that wraps it up automatically for you and turns the package into a packlet. But when that comes out, that's probably on the scale of months. It'll be the means of distributing those sort of things. More questions? No? That's it.